Hey everybody, and welcome to Junk Food and You. This is the podcast where I just sort of talk about things, like things that are on my mind about candy, junk food, snacks, anything like that. Today I'm going to talk about something. I've just recorded a bunch of episodes of this of another show I do called In Hindsight, where I take a look at candies that I reviewed a long time ago, and I try them again to see if they still sort of hold up or if they've changed or anything like that. See if the review still holds up more than anything else. And it kind of brings up a question. Do candy companies change the candies? The simple answer to that, from what I can tell, I mean, I don't know for sure. Well, I have some pretty good information on that. But the simple answer is yes. Candy companies change their candies. And I think they probably change their candies more than you think. I have heard stories that there are like a dozen upgrades to Kit Kat bars done every year. So a lot of these candy companies have test kitchens, and they're constantly changing and refining and trying to improve. So in some ways, yeah, I would say that yes, candies change, and they change a lot more than you think. Even the ones that you know as classics, they've changed. So I think a lot of it is imperceptible, and I think a lot of it is actually improvement. The one change that I think happens regularly, and again, I can't prove this, but I've been told this, is that prices of ingredients fluctuate. Cocoa is a big one on that respect. The price of cocoa fluctuates all the time. It can get very, very expensive, and it's continuing. It's actually, on a general, if you look at candy or cocoa prices in general, they're going up. So a lot of candy companies are looking for ways to use less cocoa. So I feel like they're adjusting themselves to try and make the candy more reasonably priced. So that might involve subtracting cocoa and adding other things. Again, not all candy companies do this, but I have spoken to people in the candy industry and mentioned and said, I felt like your candy isn't as chocolatey as it used to be. And they'll sort of whisper to me, because it isn't. So, I mean, yes, they do change it. I think that there's always an attempt to make candies better or more preferred by people. They're not trying to wreck candies. We can talk about size. I've talked about size in many different things. Candy sizes always change. Shrinkflation is a thing. Shrinkflation can be hidden in several ways. It could be just a big one is nutrition. They say it's nutritional, so they make single servings. So they do smaller servings, saying, "Oh, this is a more healthy size serving." It could be that they're regulated to do so. So some places have regulations about how much sugar you can have in a particular serving. So there's all kinds of factors like that. So candy sizes do change. They tend to get smaller. There are occasions where they get bigger, but for the most part, they do get smaller, and that's just the way it is. For economics, for nutrition, for whatever reason you or the candy companies want to make, they are shrinking. So that in that respect, the recipe changes. And the recipe in the case of shrinking does actually have to be modified, because candy and treats, and particularly chocolate bars and candy bars are a good example of this. When you shrink a chocolate bar, you have to sort of like shrink everything to keep the ratio of ingredients to try and keep the flavor being the same. Because ratio of ingredients is a huge part of the candy world. And so if you make something smaller, you can't just sort of say, well, we're going to use less nougat in this bar, and that's it. You have to use less nougat and less peanut and less chocolate, and you have to balance out those flavors. And when you're dealing with things like peanuts, it's hard, because if you're dealing with whole peanuts, then how do you shrink something unless you can find smaller peanuts, which is like a whole other issue. But if you grind the peanuts and suddenly it's a different texture and maybe it's not the same bar anymore. So there's all these issues that go into changing bars. So there are whole sections of candy factories that are designed about changing bars. And I mean, we can also talk about, there's the variety bars and everything like that. Like, those aren't really changes, those are like additions too. So I'm mainly here talking about do candy companies change their recipes? And the answer generally is yes. I'm not saying all of them have, but many do change their recipes. And for various reasons. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why: economics, health, all that, like I said before. So they do change them. The other time I think they change them, and again, I've never even been spoken to about, but I think packaging has changed candy. And let me explain. When I was younger, and you can still see this a little bit today, you sometimes find candy bars that are just wrapped in foil and paper, and there's nothing else. And then you find other candies that are like vacuum sealed in a package. I think since the advent of the vacuum sealed, they did changes to their bars because their bars could stay fresher longer using different ingredients. So I think that maybe because of the packaging difference, they're now able to like use different ingredients and maybe use better ingredients. Things that would normally be would normally go sort of moldy if they weren't in a completely sealed package, or something that might get stale faster because it's not in a sealed package. You can change the ingredients and actually make it better, maybe. So that's definitely a thing. The other thing, actually, I guess I didn't think about was culture. And the world's kind of shrinking. So the world knows that British Kit Kat bars are the best Kit Kat bars. The world knows that certain other countries make not so great Kit Kat bars. So maybe like you start to then have people be in those countries and be like, well, why can't we have British Kit Kat bars? Why can't we have the better Kit Kat bar? And eventually they're like, well, why would we buy these second-rate Kit Kat bars when we can have these great Kit Kat bars? That's a good question. And so maybe they might have to change their recipe. Maybe they won't do it suddenly. Coca-Cola had a bad thing where they suddenly changed the recipe to New Coke and it was a complete failure. And then they had to bring back Coke Classic, and that ended up being kind of turning into the regular Coke. So, but it's possible that some of these brands might incrementally add more to make the bars more similar to the ones that maybe people prefer. Because people prefer things and people are there's also like nostalgia and then there's preference. And sometimes that's an interesting line that candy companies have to walk on when they're changing a candy, because they don't want to ruin the people who are eating this, want the nostalgic flavor. But on the other hand, if there's people who are like, well, I don't really like this, I would like it more if it was such and such, then they kind of want to get the new people too. So it's an interesting line you have to walk on. And I think as far as changing candy, it's a balance, and that's why they have these crazy test kitchens and scientists working all the time to make the better candy for you and economically and everything like that. So it's an interesting business, and man, if I could ever talk to a food scientist about this, I'd love to. So thanks for watching this episode of Junk Food and You, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for watching. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can go to candycritic.org to find links to everything from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or whatever. You can also read well over 1,000 candy reviews, with new ones coming all the time. Candycritic.org also has links to pick up my latest books, as well as some cool candy-themed merchandise.